Number one, Knipex, fully insulated, long nose pliers, completely plastic, no metal on these. I saw these and I thought they'd be really useful for grabbing cores in, say, the back of a socket or something like that, moving them around, trying to get things into the right place, pulling short cables into terminals. But very rarely use them. The bulkiness means they're not practical to use, I find. I thought that the plastic jaws would be really useful because you wouldn't have to have that risk of damaging the cores when you're grabbing them, say, with metal long nose pliers, that you might damage the PVC on the outside. And just having plastic really means you're mitigating that risk of damaging the PVC because it's just not as hard as the metal. However, I've only used them a handful of times given their bulkiness, and I generally find that these are much less useful than their metal equivalents, although Knipex are a great brand and they do a lot of great tools. But this one personally I wouldn't recommend for DIYers. If you're working with live cables daily and you're professional, probably is worthwhile, but for us DIYers, wouldn't bother. However, I would recommend a set of insulated metal ones because these are much more versatile, and this thin end means you can grab cables in awkward places. Practically, I find the risk of damaging the PVC on cores is quite low, so I would recommend these. These are the Draper Ergo Plus. I find this bend in the handle actually makes them really practical, much easier to use, so it's much nicer to hold when you're working. So for DIYs, I would recommend these. Next up, Wera long screwdrivers. These are long reach screwdrivers. These are about 300 shaft, so foot long. They are Wera, so they're lovely quality. Definitely recommend Wera as a brand. But these screwdrivers for your average DIY, personally I bought these about 3 years ago and I've never actually found a use case for them. I thought that long shaft would be really useful and I'd find myself regularly needing to reach screws in awkward places. I was thinking maybe fixing dishwasher, washing machine, under kitchen cabinets, and anything like that, awkward to reach places, but actually I've never found a use case for them. If you're, say, working on appliances daily, washing machines, dishwashers, you might find this kind of thing useful, but I think unless you actually have a use case, I wouldn't bother buying them. Next up, DeWalt tinted safety glasses. Now, I saw these and I thought they'd be really useful for doing work outside in the summer, say cutting things with an angle grinder, anything like that. However, the tint means that actually it's quite difficult to see anything unless it's a really bright day outside. Even on a bright day, to be honest, I find that the clear ones are sufficient to protect your eyes from the sun and actually be able to see what you're doing. I'd recommend the clear ones. These are good all the time, even inside, you can see plenty through the clear ones. Next up, ratchet pipe cutters. So these work for kind of 15, 22mm plastic pipe. You can also do electrical conduit with them as well. These are unbranded, very cheap version I found online. However, I find they have a real tendency to just squish the pipe. This flat blade really tends to squish the pipe before it cuts into it. You can alleviate that a bit by turning as you cut, but I still find you squish the pipe, which conduit isn't great, and PVC pipe, it makes it difficult to get your inserts in and then push into the fittings as well. What I'd recommend instead, these. So the difference really is you've got this V shape, you've got this point in the blade, which just means it pierces first, so you're not trying to cut through the entire pipe at once. You're cutting a much smaller surface area at each time. They work in the same way. Ratchet. So just a bit of 22mm JG speed fit pipe here. So this is just PEX pipe. So these are the just straight jawed ones. So you can see there it's already squishing the pipe. It does start to go through eventually, but you can see how that pipe has been deformed. So that's, it's difficult to see on camera perfectly, but that's ever so slightly oval shape. So it's going to make it hard to get the insert in there, and you end up having to try and squeeze the pipe back to round before you can get the insert in. Much easier to cut and much rounder. Next tool, flexible screwdriver. So this is one where you can just put any bit in the end. This is a Wera one again, so lovely quality. But my biggest issue with these, the whole range of these, is that you just can't get the torque through them because this flexible shaft, I mean the Wera ones are a lot better than some of the cheaper brands I've used, but you're just never getting the torque through this. So if you've got a screw that's difficult to undo, you're not going to get it undone with this, or if you're trying to get a screw into something where it's requiring quite a lot of force to do the screw up, this isn't going to do it for you. What instead I would recommend is one of these 90-degree impact rated tools. So you can see you're turning here and it's turning the head in there. So these aren't confined just to screws. You can drill with them too, but when you've got a screw in a tight space, or you're trying to get a screw out from underneath something. So I found myself taking the leg off a kitchen unit, and you haven't got the space to be getting a regular screwdriver or impact driver under there, but this, because you've got such a small height here, means you can get them into these awkward places. And this screw bit that's in here, whilst it may look like that wouldn't be enough to do up or undo a screw, that's actually plenty, so you really are just working with such a small distance there. Great tool, really, really useful. I've had this for 2 or 3 years now, fairly regular use, still working great, never done any maintenance on it at all. I'm sure a bit of grease or something wouldn't hurt. There do look to be some screws here, so you probably can access the mechanical parts to add some grease if you think necessary.
You can see here that even with the bit in there, you're not looking at more than 40mm, so you can get into some really tight spaces with this. Now I've got the 90-degree impact bit, just in a regular DeWalt impact driver, and what I'm going to do is, just demonstration, remove this screw from this piece of wood here, as I actually don't have any screws that I want to remove in awkward places. So just get the piece in there. Very straightforward. Always helpful to have a magnetic bit in there, ferrous screws, but would highly recommend.
Final tool, Makita corded SDS drill. Now this is actually a great drill, really powerful, good value for money, really well built. I had this for about a year and used it regularly, really impressed, but then I bought a cordless one and I realised actually how irritating it is having to plug this cord in all the time. It saves so much time having the cordless. So the cordless one, I bought a DeWalt one, was actually only slightly more expensive. Now DeWalt cordless one, only slightly more expensive, but so much more flexible, where you've got that battery pack. Battery life's fairly good. I use the 5 amp hour battery packs in this. It does all the same functionality as the Makita, you just don't need to be dragging those extension leads around with you. Most of the time I find myself using this, it's for drilling holes in walls, you know, a much bigger hole than you would, kind of anything over 5.5mm drill bit usually I would get this out. Might do a 6 or an 8 just with the combi drill, but anything bigger than that, and if I'm going into concrete, I'd always get this out, even for 5.5mm. Unless you're, say, doing something like trying to take render off a wall where you're going to be using a lot of power, I'd recommend this because you're not going to get through the batteries that quickly. If you are doing something like taking render off a wall, the corded one will be the choice, because you're just going to find yourself chewing through so many batteries.